Kant's philosophy, freedom, autonomy, and moral duty. Determinist critique. Critics argue that Kant's notion of transcendental freedom is incompatible with determinism, which posits that all events, including human actions, are determined by prior causes. Philosophers' critique. Baruch Spinoza and Arthur Schopenhauer contend that Kant fails to convincingly prove free will's existence, suggesting that even rational decisions are influenced by biological, psychological, and social factors. Hume's argument. Hume asserts that Kant's emphasis on reason neglects the essential role of emotions in moral decision-making. He believes that moral judgments are significantly influenced by feelings, such as sympathy and compassion, which Kantian ethics may overlook. Critique of individualism. Feminist philosophers, including Carol Gilligan and Virginia Held, argue that Kant's focus on autonomy is too abstract and individualistic. Key idea. They suggest that moral reasoning should incorporate relational aspects and care for others, emphasizing the importance of context and interpersonal relationships in ethical decision-making. Sartre's perspective. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre agree with Kant's focus on freedom but highlight the existential burden it entails. Key idea. Sartre claims individuals are condemned to be free, suggesting that the overwhelming responsibility of making moral choices in a world devoid of predetermined moral laws can lead to existential angst. Unlike Kant, who views freedom as adherence to moral law, Sartre emphasizes the radical and sometimes burdensome nature of absolute freedom. Kant's ethical philosophy emphasizes the categorical imperative, highlighting the significance of autonomy and moral duty. His framework has profoundly influenced modern ethical thought, despite facing critiques related to rigidity, emotional neglect, and contextual considerations. Kant's insistence on rationality, freedom, and respect for human dignity remains foundational in contemporary discussions of ethics and morality, emphasizing the enduring relevance of his ideas in understanding moral philosophy today. Immanuel Kant's philosophy of moral law and duty is central to his ethical framework, as outlined in the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, 1785, and further elaborated in the Critique of Practical Reason, 1788. Kant's ethics are grounded in deontological principles, which assert that the morality of an action is determined not by its consequences but by its adherence to a set of moral rules or laws. He argues that moral laws are universal, derived from human reason, and impose duties upon rational beings. These duties represent actions that individuals are morally obligated to perform, regardless of personal inclinations or the outcomes of the actions. Therefore, Kant emphasizes the importance of acting out of duty, positing that moral worth resides not in the results of an action, but in the motivation to fulfill one's moral obligations. For Kant, moral law consists of universal principles that rational agents must follow. These laws are not imposed by societal norms or divine commandments but are derived from reason itself. Kant introduces the categorical imperative as the fundamental principle of moral law, which serves as a guide for determining ethical behavior. This imperative highlights the idea that moral actions must be universally applicable, meaning that individuals should act only according to maxims that they could will to become universal laws. In Kantian ethics, duty refers to the moral obligations that arise from the moral law. Kant emphasizes that actions are morally right when they are performed from duty, rather than merely in accordance with duty or for personal gain. An action possesses moral worth if it is executed because it is deemed right, not because of external motivations such as rewards, desires, or emotions. Acting from duty, Kant argues that the only actions with true moral value are those performed out of a sense of duty to the moral law. He distinguishes between actions done in accordance with duty, and those done from duty. For instance, if someone helps others because they enjoy it, their action may align with duty, but its moral worth is questionable due to its basis in personal inclination. Conversely, if a person assists others solely because it is their duty, regardless of personal satisfaction, then their action embodies genuine moral worth according to Kant's framework. Example: consider a shopkeeper who treats customers fairly primarily to build a good reputation and increase profits. While this action aligns with moral expectations, it lacks true moral worth as it is driven by self-interest. However, if the shopkeeper acts fairly even at the expense of profits, solely out of a sense of moral duty, then their action holds significant moral value in Kant's view. Moral worth and goodwill. Kant's notion of duty is intrinsically linked to the concept of goodwill, which he asserts is the only unconditional good. A person's will is deemed morally good when they act out of duty, and adhere to the moral law. As Kant famously states, nothing in the world, indeed nothing even beyond the world, can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualification except a good will. Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals, 1785. Thus, moral worth is assessed not by the outcomes of actions but by the intent to act according to duty. Kant's ideas about moral law and duty remain significantly relevant in modern contexts. His emphasis on duty and adherence to moral principles over personal gain or emotional inclinations has shaped contemporary views on ethics, professionalism, and human rights. 1. Professional integrity. Kant's concept of duty informs ethical standards in various professions, including law, medicine, and business. Professionals are expected to act according to moral and ethical standards, even when doing so is challenging or against their self-interest. For example, a doctor may be ethically bound to provide care to a patient, even if this entails personal sacrifice, such as working overtime or treating a particularly difficult case without additional compensation. 2. Personal responsibility and accountability. Kant's ethics demand that individuals take responsibility for their actions by acting out of respect for moral laws, regardless of their feelings or desires. In personal relationships, this might involve being honest even when lying would be easier or more convenient, or keeping a promise despite its diminishing benefits to oneself. Kant's emphasis on moral duty encourages individuals to uphold their responsibilities, fostering trust and integrity in everyday interactions. 3. Human rights and justice. Kant's commitment to universal moral laws and duties contributes to modern notions of human rights. For instance, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reflects Kant's ideas about the intrinsic dignity of individuals and the duties we hold to respect the rights of others. His belief that moral duties apply universally has profoundly influenced the development of egalitarian principles and the concept of justice as fairness. Despite its foundational importance, Kant's rigid focus on duty and moral law has faced criticism from various philosophical perspectives, arguing that his system neglects essential aspects of human experience, such as emotions, consequences, and contextual considerations. 1. Consequentialist critique. A major critique comes from utilitarians like John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, who contend that the morality of an action should be judged based on its consequences, rather than strict adherence to duty. According to utilitarianism, actions are morally right if they promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. In contrast, Kant's system mandates that individuals follow their duties, even when doing so may lead to undesirable outcomes. Example: consider a scenario where lying could save a person's life. A strict application of Kant's moral law would necessitate telling the truth, potentially resulting in harm. Critics argue that this rigidity fails to accommodate exceptions based on the outcomes of actions. 2. Humean critique. The role of emotions. David Hume argues that Kant overemphasizes reason and duty in moral decision-making, while neglecting the role of emotions. Hume famously posited that reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions, a treatise of human nature, 1739, suggesting that moral actions are motivated by feelings such as compassion or empathy rather than abstract reasoning about duty. Humean ethics posits that Kant's duty-based system is overly detached from the emotional and social realities that influence human behavior. Example: a person may rescue a drowning child out of compassion rather than due to a rational reflection on their duty to help. Hume would argue that this emotional motivation is equally valid, if not more so, than Kant's duty-based approach. 3. Existentialist critique. Freedom and responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist philosopher, critiques Kant's ethics for failing to recognize the burden of individual freedom and responsibility. For Sartre, morality is not about adhering to predefined duties or moral laws, it is about the radical freedom individuals possess to create their own values. He posits that individuals are condemned to be free and must take responsibility for their choices without the comfort of objective moral laws. Example: Sartre would suggest that instead of merely following moral laws, individuals must confront the anxiety associated with freedom and establish their own ethical paths based on personal responsibility and the specific circumstances they encounter. 4. The problem of conflicting duties. Another critique highlights that Kant's theory struggles to address situations where duties conflict. For instance, what should one do when faced with two conflicting duties, such as the duty to tell the truth and the duty to protect others? Kant's system lacks a clear method for resolving such dilemmas, which can leave individuals with challenging moral choices. Example: imagine hiding someone from a tyrannical government. If authorities inquire whether you are harboring the person, you face a conflict between the duty to tell the truth and the duty to protect an innocent life. Kant's moral framework does not provide a straightforward solution to such conflicts. Immanuel Kant's reflections on moral law and duty form the foundation of deontological ethics. He argues that moral law is universal and grounded in reason, and that the only actions possessing moral value are those performed out of a sense of duty. Kant's focus on acting out of respect for moral principles continues to influence modern ethical thought, particularly in areas such as professional integrity, personal responsibility, and human rights. Nonetheless, Kant's system has faced criticism for its rigidity, neglect of emotions, and failure to account for the consequences of actions. Despite these critiques, Kant's moral philosophy remains a cornerstone of ethical theory, inspiring ongoing debates about duty, morality, and human agency.